Thank you for listening to the P-Pod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the P-Pod.
Right then, welcome back to the P-Pod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, I'm really pleased today to be joined by my guest because I know that she's been working extremely hard in the background over the last couple of years on a really, really important topic. Now, just to set the scene a little bit here, if we go back to working together back in 2018, which brought about the partnership arrangements for the Safeguarding Children Partnerships, and at that point set in stone what are known as the three statutory safeguarding partners. So that is the local authority, police and health as well. And I think right from the word go, there was a very, very strong desire to include education as a fourth statutory safeguarding partner. And this is going back to 2018 now. And really since then, there's been a lot of head scratching going on and a lot of will from the government, recognising education as a really key safeguarding stakeholder, as it's classed in working together, and very much a desire to have education as a fourth statutory safeguarding partner. But alongside that come a whole host of complications. And I think, to be fair to the government, they have been saying very clearly for a number of years now, we do want education as a fourth statutory safeguarding partner. We're just not too sure how that's going to work. Now, just to kind of clarify around that for anybody listening, thinking, well, it could be pretty straightforward. When we think about education is not a single body as such. So we might have independent schools, local authority maintained schools, academies. So the question is, how do you have not only one person representing that whole sector, but also how do you have somebody who's able to hold the entire sector accountable in terms of safeguarding? And it is a big challenge. And to be fair to the government, I say they are looking very much at ways of how they can achieve this. And as part of that, over the last few years, they've been really looking out towards safeguarding children partnerships to see if there's any initiatives that are taking place to be able to sort of set the scene and prove as a sort of pilot project about how this could work. And I'm really pleased that actually Somerset has been very much part of this. And going back 2 years ago, almost exactly, we had a new initiative started off to have education represented on the executive group of the Safeguarding Children Partnership. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Natalie Hanna, who is currently sitting as the executive member for education within the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. So, Natalie, thank you so much for coming along today. I know you've been working really hard, and I know at the end of term, you're juggling a lot of things. You've got pupils outside your door as we speak wanting to talk to you. So I appreciate your time. But thank you very much for coming along. I think before we begin, obviously, being the executive members is not your sort of full-time role. So could you just sort of introduce yourself and what your day job is, but also some of the other work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve, for having me. I'm very excited and slightly nervous to be here. So essentially, my day job is a head teacher of a special school in the Mendip area of Somerset. This school was built in 2015 and I've been head teacher here for probably the last 8 years. We're a school for autism and speech, language and communication needs. And as a school new to Somerset, I was really welcomed in and joined what is the SENSE group. So the SENSE group was the Association of Special Schools across Somerset, which was 7 of us, most of whom were local authority maintained when I joined. And for a couple of years, I was privileged enough to chair that group and be part of lots of local authority action and movements. And one of the huge things that I did as chair of that group was support the outcomes of the Send Ofsted review at Somerset. I'm also part of the Partnership Trust, which is one of the first trusts that was set up in the area. We have 18 schools across Somerset and Baines, predominantly primaries with 2 special schools. And within that trust, I am Director of Safeguarding. So I've been doing that now probably for 3 or 4 years.
So yeah, you've got several hats on. And I say one of those over the last 2 years, alongside everything else that you've been doing with SENSE as a head teacher as well, as I mentioned, is sitting on the executive group. This goes back just over 2 years now, I think. So can you sort of take us back a little bit in terms of sort of how did that come about? How did you end up sort of sitting on the executive group?
Yeah, well, I think as I started working for the Trust as Director of Safeguarding, one of the huge things that I noticed straight away was how busy the day-to-day job of a DSL is, especially in a small primary school where you've got the head teacher and the DSL in role. I was going in as a trust director of safeguarding, holding people accountable for their safeguarding practices and procedures. And it was a lovely thing to do because often you have really positive relationships with the heads that you work with in trust and the DSLs. But it was also quite frustrating because one of the first things that came out was the audit that I was doing was duplicating work that was also happening at local authority level. So the audits that were completed, the 175, 157 audits, there was no way for those two things to be aligned. So people were being held accountable twice. And for me, that was a massive, massive frustration. Anything that increases workload or duplicates what we're doing at school level, I get really passionate about. And so I'd started having those conversations within the local authority. And then, as I say, as chair of Sense, I ended up sat around the table at the Ofsted meeting down in County Hall, and Claire Winter was opposite me. So I kind of had that conversation with her and said, how do we change these things so that what we do within school settings and what we do at local authority level is aligned and we're not producing extra work for everybody? And Claire said, I've been thinking about this for a while. I'd love for education to be a partner on the board. And I said, I'll do it. Me. And again, then we sat down and had to think about it and thought, actually, how do I, as one head teacher in one school or one director of safeguarding in one trust, represent the voice of all those education settings? I can talk about the people that I spend time with and the groups that I represent. But it was really important that even at that point, we had kind of that unity across the system. So at that point, the route was to go out to the associations. So I messaged out to Sense and to SASH and to SAF and asked, would anybody want to fulfill this responsibility, or would anybody have any objections if I did? And nobody came back to say that they had any issues. So I took that as a vote of confidence and stepped into the role in September 2023.
Yeah, and it's and just as a bit of sort of wider information for people. So you mentioned a few different groups there. You mentioned SAF and SASH. So similar association, like you mentioned about Sense, which is for special schools. So SAF and SASH is the groups representing primary schools and secondary school heads there as well across Somerset. And I think you've picked up on a really important point straight away, because although we do have those groups, that's still not kind of widely kind of represented. And just a bit of wider context for people listening as well, as part of the Safeguarding Children Partnerships, we have various subgroups that take place as part of the Safeguarding Children Partnership. One of those, up until recently, was an education subgroup. And I think one of the challenges of that, as you've already kind of alluded to in your introduction there, is about having representation from across the board. And actually, I think over time, understanding that actually those small groups actually weren't able, no criticism of them, just in terms of their ability to actually represent widely. So I think it's probably fair to say it was a brave move for you to step up, but one that was very, very welcome, because it is so key, isn't it, that we have education there.
And I think, Steve, it's important to say about the associations, when we were all local authority maintained, or there were a few trusts coming out, they were funded by local authority as a support network for all those schools. So they were hugely attended. The representation was quite high in all of those groups across the sector. And now I think that has changed and had to change because of the fractured nature of the education system, which is one of our huge challenges, isn't it?
Absolutely. So over the last couple of years then, I know from talking to you, you've learned a lot. I think we've all learned a lot as part of this. And that was the aim really of these sort of first 2 years, to see how it goes, work out what happens, see what works, what doesn't work. So I guess over the last couple of years, are you able to give a bit of an overview about what you've been up to in a broad nutshell?
Yeah. So essentially I attend meetings of the partnership, and that happens 6 times a year between the main group and then the kind of extended group that happens. Coming to the table at that, you're looking at kind of those strategic level decisions. So you're looking at how the partnership is budgeted for, what kind of income is coming across from the training sector. You're looking at case reviews. You're looking at reports that are provided by the independent scrutineer. You are looking at one of the big focuses, I think, that came at the end of the first year was the joint targeted area inspection, the JTI. And coming out of that were a lot of actions around things that needed to be put in place across all of the agencies, and then things that were specific to the agencies. So you might be looking at, for example, how you roll out training across the police and health and local authority and schools. And all of those kind of people work in different ways. So it's a conversation about actually, well, this will work for us and this won't work for us, and different aspects of that. case reviews. Often they will come in and the work goes on in the background, and then they'll come to the table and you'll look at, actually, are there any questions that we have around this? Is there anything that is unclear in looking at this? Are there any further things that we need to go back and answer? So a really diverse range of things that I didn't quite expect. Risk management. We look at the risk register regularly and identify areas that could potentially cause problems in the future. But a lot of work that I wasn't necessarily expecting to come to the table comes to those meetings. There's also subgroups, as you say, Steve. So sometimes I will be invited to attend a subgroup. So the development of the child sexual exploitation tool has been one that's been ongoing, looking at working with health on obesity in under fives. So there's lots of different things that I'll get invited to, some of which I'm able to go to and some of which I'm not, but all fascinating, and a huge amount of work goes on in the background that people, I think, maybe just don't realise.
And I think it's fair to say, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I know we've had conversations outside of here. And I know from talking to you before, I think it's fair to say it was a bit of an eye-opener for you, sort of coming into the role and initially thinking, great, I can just come in just to chip in to the conversation saying, wave your hand, say, what about education within this?
Yeah.
But I think you realise actually it's like I say, it's quite a big beast.
Yeah, I was so naive walking into it to think, I mean, when you only work in education, you only see how things work in education. When you then step into other agencies, you see how things work in those agencies. And if you think about the complexities of some of that, so the police are working across 5 counties and trying to align their safeguarding partnerships across all of those 5 counties. Health are working in different trusts in the same way that education do, but their trusts are more established and more developed and more, I think they're more structured in lots of ways because they're area trusts rather than necessarily kind of split across localities. But there are still challenges within the governance of that. They can't say, actually, we're going to do this one thing and we're going to do it across the system. It just doesn't work like that. And then you have the added complexity of the level at which those agencies are working. So they're always dealing with the worst cases and the highest level of safeguarding, whereas education, we really are completely centered within early help. Everything that we want to do, everything that we want to achieve is let's prevent. Whereas actually the other agencies would love to prevent, but their capacity has to be predominantly focused on responding. And that's the nature of the beast, which I was really naive in that and thinking actually those two things would merge quite easily. And they just don't. It's a really difficult challenge to try and work out. And I think there's also, Steve, one of the things I've definitely taken away from this is we all get frustrated in education. Why don't the police, why don't health, why don't social care think about talking to the school? And essentially, to be able to do that, it's an add-on at the moment. And it has to be an add-on because they're working within so many legislative structures and so many procedural things and systems that actually thinking about education is an add-on because it's not getting the job that they need to do done in the moment. So it's how we kind of move that from that place to thinking, even thinking of ourselves as partners within that. But it's been a really steep area of learning for me. It's not through lack of want or lack of people wanting to be in that kind of proactive and an early help stage, but there is just a divide that you're starting with because of the nature of the roles that we fulfill.
And it's interesting, I think, looking at changes to working together to safeguard children back in 2023, we were fully expecting education to become a full statutory safeguarding partner then.
Mm-hmm.
It was taken out fairly last minute, which we were quite surprised about. But it is there again, one of the key components of the current Children's Welfare and Schools Bill, which we're looking to hopefully go through into law later on this year. So it's definitely in a kind of area we're moving towards. And I think, just picking up from what you're saying as well, the other thing alongside that is that continual positive move, I think, within statutory guidance around focusing more around early help and more around, like I say, not having those divides, very much about working together. And in terms of the Children's Welfare and Schools Bill, about setting up locality teams, having a multi-agency safeguarding team, encompassing those key partners, which includes education within that. So I think there is a shift for that, but I think you're right. It's tricky to navigate, isn't it? And not only have you got those kind of sides of but safeguarding child protection coming together and needing to mesh together in an effective way. But then on top of that, you've then got, like say, that diversity of the education sector, including the independent sector, which we've got a lot of independent schools within Somerset.
Alternative provisions, early help settings.
It's massive.
Just broad, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know from talking to you that, and sort of now we're coming to the end of in fact, we've pretty much reached the end of your tenure on the executive group. I know that you were due to step down a little while back, but I also know that you are really passionate about that, which is brilliant, which is why I wanted to talk to you. And I know we've had conversations about your hopes, your aspirations moving forward and what that looks like. Before we sort of get on to that, what are your thoughts about that move from the government to make sure we are including education as a statutory partner? Do you think it's a positive move?
Oh, 100%. I think education has value to add at that strategic level. And there have definitely been moments where I've been able to kind of impact on the strategic board and say, okay, well, actually, schools could support with this. This is something that we're already doing that we could bring into the picture. Or, actually, that won't work that way in schools. We need to think about how we reach all of those different people and pass that information. And as the time has gone on, definitely I've been able to, I'm more familiar with the structures that are in place in local authority that would allow that to happen.
Yeah.
There's still going to be parts of the system that we find it really hard to reach. I think it is the right move, 100%. I think lots of my learning has been about us being an untapped resource. Schools are doing so much and can be doing so much to safeguard kids, but it's about that communication and us all kind of proactively thinking how we reach out to those other agencies, from us to them and them to us. We're all looking at exactly the same problem. We're just standing in really different places. And we need to kind of just get closer together a little bit to be able to tackle that. And I really look forward to kind of this next phase of the project to see where it goes, because I think other people will have different ideas of how this can work. And we'll see lots of little sections, won't we, popping up of people trying education work it. And there will be a way. It won't be perfect and we will all have learning and movement to do. But I think we've made a really good start, and I feel really confident about the work that we've done. And genuinely just such a privilege to learn so much from those other partners and other agencies.
Well, and added to that, it's been a privilege to have you part of that role, because I know that you're so passionate about it and full of ideas. And hopefully I'm not talking out of turn here, but I think from talking to you, it took quite a while, like you mentioned, to get your head around it all.
Yeah.
But actually now you have, it's like, okay, here you go. Here's what could work. Here's the bits that don't work and what have you. And with that, and moving forward, what are the kind of key challenges that you would envisage for education as a statutory partner?
Well, I think Somerset have done an awful lot of work really, really well around making sure that education settings have the training, support and information that we need. And I think that is really firmly established and in place. And as a DSL working in Somerset and then also working in other local authorities, I see how much of a strength that is across the system. It's getting the voice of education back up to the strategic level of partnership, which is a real challenge. And potentially, I think, representation on those kind of the boards around the L&I and Q&P and all of those kind of sub boards that sit just below the partnership. We need education represented there, and we need to hear what the challenges are that people are facing on the ground. So I know we've started, haven't we, Steve? We looked at the current structure that we had in place and thought this isn't working anymore because we have representation from the associations and that's not broad enough anymore. So we spent some time kind of pulling that together and looking at how do we gather the voice of everyone across the system? So that is the early years settings, the alternative provisions, the LA maintained, all the trust schools. How do we get all of those things? Colleges. I mean, every time you think there's another one to just add in to think, actually, the EOTIS kids, how do we make sure they're safeguarded and who represents them at this board? So we had our first meeting in, I want to say April, maybe March. Was it March?
Oh, I can't remember now.
Last term.
Look back a little while back.
Yeah.
Like you say, we've kind of looked at this together and really sort of looked to hone it down of, what are those really core components that we've got to make sure we get right, and sort of honing that down to, making sure we're able to communicate out from the partnership to all of those different agencies effectively, making sure we're getting those voices from that broad representation of agencies back into the partnership to influence. And thirdly, having that key decision making as part of that executive role to really put right at the heart of everything the partnership does, that voice front and center, and essentially education working as a single agency alongside the local authority, police and health, and those four key sectors working as one to safeguard children here. And I know when we've looked at it in terms of communicating out, not saying it's perfect, but I think there are a lot of avenues.
Good. I would say it's absolutely pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, we have things like the head teacher briefings, there's the DSL briefings that have been taking place this week. And there's always really good turnout for those, which is brilliant. So getting that communication out, and obviously as business unit, a large focus of mine and my colleagues is about communication. So we kind of felt, okay, well, that's not too bad. But then it brings that, how do we bring the voices in, making sure we've got direct feeding into the partnership arrangements and really flagging, like say, those key bits, saying, actually, do you know what? This is working really well right now. Actually, this is really not working. We're struggling with this. So on that, I know from what we've talked about, one of the really core components of your planning moving forward was the Education Safeguarding Forum, and looking at a new way of actually how do we collaborate, how do we get those different sectors together, and really making sure we are feeding back in. So, like you say, we had the first meeting of that last term. Can you talk to us about that, sort of who was there and what involved? Because sadly, I wasn't able to be at that event, but I know you were really driving that forward.
Yeah, and I think that the key challenge has been anything that we want to kind of achieve or find out about from schools, we've had to go to 8 different places to be able to kind of gather that information. So I know definitely around Mendip about 6 months ago, there was an issue with police notifications coming through with a significant delay. And I was able to go to Sense and ask them about that. And they were able to come back with the information and say, actually, we're not seeing that in Yeovil or Taunton. We're just seeing that in the Mendip area. And then you can take that back into the partnership and kind of tackle it as an example of the kind of thing that was really, really difficult. Because then you have to go out to the other associations, and then you go to the MAT CEOs group, and then you also need to contact early years settings. And so the forum was designed to unite all those groups together and have representation from each of those groups feeding into it. And we had the first one, and the plan is that there will be the right people around the table to represent enough sectors of education, and that will build over time. But whoever chairs that group moving forward will take over this role next year and be the education exec on the Safeguarding Partnership. So the event we had about 21 different representatives. So if you think about each of those trusts that are represented, and we have local authority colleagues, Catherine and Beth there were business support there. So it was a really lovely collaboration of people. And actually the conversations that they were having about the challenges they face at school level really helped us to kind of think about what we were taking back into the partnership and looking at and developing. So there's been some ongoing work as a result of that, which will feed out to the next one on the 10th of June. And we also had a number of people step forward and express interest in the role for next year, which we are absolutely delighted with. Because as you say, Steve, there's lots of ideas out there. People will have different experiences to bring to the table. And actually the next person will be able to at least have those functions in place to be able to communicate with schools and to take information from schools. And I think that was really something that when we met to talk about it was hugely important. It's setting up the next person to have an easier journey and to be able to start from a point of, oh, well, if I need to do this, this is the group that I take it to. Or if I need information to feed back in, I can gather it from that group. So it was really, really important. And I know that it was important to you as well because you were attending the previous meetings and there was representation, but there wasn't information. Information wasn't coming back in.
Yeah.
And that's because the system had changed so much since that group had been designed. So I feel really passionate about it. It's a really weird situation because you kind of set something up and then you step back from it. And it's like anything, isn't it? It's all about sustainability into the future. But there are some really passionate and solid people working within that group who will push it forward. And I'll be able to attend in a non-chair capacity and give my information to the new education rep, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, as I know from talking to you, you're really passionate to make sure that you have an opportunity now in this next term or last term of the academic year for that handover, like you say,
Yeah.
and actually impart that knowledge that you've got, which I think is has been huge and kind of a very steep learning curve as taking on that pilot project and that role. And I think just picking up again on the forum, although we've talked about, okay, education is a huge beast. I don't know how many schools we have in Somerset. I should know off the top of my head.
300-ish, I
I was
think.
going to say it's about 300. And so there is a question like, how do you get 300 schools in the room? And actually, what we've talked about is you don't have to. What you need to do, particularly with the mats, for example, now, you could have one person representing 10, 15, 20 or more schools.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the key bit to sort of hone in on. So actually from that, you can get some real key players
Yeah.
in one room and represent a large sector there, including primary schools, secondary schools, within that. I think it's really exciting moving forward. And it'd be great to see how that develops.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's all functions, isn't it? Everything is about functions and systems. And if we can get the right functions and systems in place for education, then it will work and it will be successful moving forward. So,
yeah.
And that will give someone more capacity to think about actually what the role of education is at that strategic level, rather than having to kind of work through how to communicate effectively and how to gather information and how to kind of join up the dots as to who is it that I need to talk to about this thing, or who's already working on this that I'm not sure of. So there's a lot of kind of the smoother pathways, hopefully.
Mm. And so with the next steps for that then, so you mentioned you have some people coming forward, so they'd be keen to take up that mantle. And again, I know when we were first talking about the forum, we were really keen to actually have ownership from the education sector, say, actually, this is the person we wish to represent us. So what's the sort of next steps with that?
Yeah. So when we met, Steve, we talked about, didn't we, that we weren't sure how many people would come forward, but we are delighted that there have been multiple people putting their names into the hat. So what we've asked them to do is we've sent out the job description, asked them to write an expression of interest based on why they think they would be suited to the role. And the next step is to then send that out to as many education settings as we possibly can to do an election, just a really straightforward, simple, tick the box. Who would you like to see represent you on this forum? We did talk about just having the people at the forum vote in terms of an election, but we actually thought if we could get a wider representation at this point with the forum being so new, that would potentially be a benefit. So we're going to try and keep it as fair and as equitable as we can. And I think that's really key, isn't it? There could be any number of people sat at home in their armchair going, I'd love to sit on the Safeguarding Partnership Board. Mm. And it would be really lovely for those people to know that there is a function whereby they can achieve that. And there is a structure in place to support the best person, the best voice coming forward. And I'm really excited. I think even having one person step forward is a success in terms of the role now has a profile. It wasn't something that existed before, and now it is, and people are interested, which I think I'm taking that as a win.
No, definitely. I think it's great, and I think it's great. There's such a passion to get this right, and I know you're really passionate about it, and I'm sure whoever sort of takes up that role will be passionate about it as well. And I know as well the existing executive members are keen to get this right, and I know they've committed some funding for that position as well. So it's not going to be a full-time role, but there's a small amount of funding there to actually help to subsidise that commitment that's needed with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a brave thing to do. I think for the other partners at the exec level, they're opening their systems and their structures and just letting someone come in and see how they do things. And they're really open to taking that feedback and listening to a different perspective. And I think that's something that should also be recognised and valued. Not everyone has to do that. And lots of systems kind of shut themselves down and keep themselves in-house. Actually, to ask for that feedback and to be so open to it, I think is a real benefit to us in Somerset.
Mm. So I guess kind of looking to next steps then. So looking to hopefully get somebody recruited into that post very shortly, having that handover, that transition period with yourself before you can finally breathe a slight sigh of relief as we get towards the end of the academic year. With that, what would be your key messages that you'd want to sort of hand over to that person?
Oh, that's a great question. I think potentially don't jump straight into things. when you work, so I've been a head teacher in a DSL in a school for a long time and director of safeguarding. So if something needs to be done, my viewpoint is, well, let's just crack on and do it. That's not how things work in much more complex, much more fractured organizations. And it's definitely not how things work when there are 3 or 4 agencies trying to work together at the same time. So I think just make sure you ask the questions to get the information about who's already involved, who's already on that journey, who is halfway along this before you start then trying to come up with a solution. I think one of my strengths is that I'm so solution focused. I just go, yeah, okay, fine, I can do that. Let's solve that problem. That doesn't work in a system like this. You have to get the pieces of the jigsaw first and work out, okay, so actually I need to touch base with that person because it has an HR implication, or I need to touch base with that person because the police are already working in this area. So you just need to make sure you take a minute, which I'm sure people with other personalities will, but just take a minute and find out all the information. Don't be afraid to ask, okay, is there anyone already doing a piece of this work? Because it's much easier to start from that point than it is to try and correct things that have gone a little bit awry along the way.
And I guess just kind of building on your experience over the last couple of years then, looking to take this forward, hopefully we're looking at this coming in through the Children's Welfare and Schools Bill shortly. What would you say, either locally or to government, around having education as a statutory safeguarding partner, about some of the bits, what do they really need to consider? How do they really make it work and make sure we've got education at the heart of everything that we do?
I mean, if I could turn back time, Steve, I would say don't fracture the system in the way that you have.
As in the education system?
The education system, because
Right.
I think as soon as we split that governance away from local authorities, we lost any of the levers within education to affect that kind of change. So I think essentially the current government is just working with how to put that right. And I'm all on board for trust. I thought it was a great thing and a great idea, but the governance structures just don't match. So without those, it's really hard to affect those changes. People have choices about what they do and how they do it. But I would say, you're asking me all the tough questions.
I am.
Now.
I'm sorry. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, I think just keep trying and make sure that possibly what we need to identify is the function by which we find the person. I think the easy win, and we've talked about this ourselves, and I've talked about it with Catherine and Beth and with Amelia and lots of other people working at local authority. I think the easy fit is to put someone who already works for local authority in representing education, but I don't think that's the right fit. I think it's really important for me that it remains someone who is serving within a role as DSL, so that you're experiencing the challenges that schools have to face. Lots of things that we ask our schools to do are based in the theory, and actually when you try and put those into practice, it can be quite difficult. So having someone who is aware of that practice brings advantages and challenges. It allows you to see how difficult that will be to implement, and actually how maybe that's not the right fit, but it also brings the challenge of you being further away from the other partners and how they see things. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, definitely. And it's, I think it's exciting times, isn't it? I think
It is.
it's challenging, like we've been saying. It's complex, it's challenging, but I do think it's exciting. And I think we're in a moment of change for the better of these things.
And I'm hugely proud that we've been ahead of the curve on that.
Definitely.
No, there's lots of local authorities that haven't gone anywhere near this yet, and we've had a good bash at it, and we've learnt a lot, and we're now ready to kind of look at moving that forward, which is really positive, isn't it?
Definitely. Well, I think that's a great note to end on, if you're happy with that. But Natalie, thank you so much, not just for today and for the recording, and it's always great to talk to you, but also for the work that you've been doing over the last couple of years, because I know you've been absolutely passionate about this. I know it was a very steep learning curve for you and everybody, I think, involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I do feel like coming out from this, we're in a really strong position from what you've learned and the experience that you can impart. And I know it's something that you're really keen to do and make this a success moving forward. So thank you so much for everything. It's very much appreciated.
Steve, thank you for all your support throughout the journey, and local authority colleagues who've taught me so much about actually how safeguarding works on a different level. So thank you
very much. All right. Well, take care. And we're just about to have a school holiday. So I hope you have a good break. And I look forward to seeing you in the final term of this academic year, where hopefully we've got somebody in place and we can start the handover to him.
Lovely. Thanks, Steve.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, please go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in this episode description. If you enjoy listening to the P-Pod, we would really appreciate it if you took that time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave us a review and let other people know about it. And make sure to let your colleagues know about this podcast and encourage them to join us here as well. It really does help to spread the word. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we would love you to get in touch with us at thepod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guest today, Natalie Hanna, head teacher and current executive member of the SSCP for Education. And as always, I would like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at the P-Pod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.